On a rainy evening in the quiet suburb of Meadowbrook, Pennsylvania, the tranquility of the neighborhood was shattered by the sound of police sirens and the sight of flashing lights. It was the night of October 14, 2015, when the body of Samantha Williams, a 38-year-old housewife, was discovered in her kitchen, lying in a pool of blood. The investigation that followed would reveal a tale of forbidden passion, simmering resentment, and an unexpected betrayal that led to a tragic end. Samantha Williams was known in her community as a devoted wife and mother. She lived in a spacious, well-maintained house with her husband, Mark Williams, and their two teenage children, Emily and Jason. Mark, a successful corporate lawyer, was often away on business trips, leaving Samantha to manage the household and care for their children. To the outside world, the Williams family seemed perfect, financially secure, socially active, and deeply respected. But beneath the surface, cracks had begun to appear in Samantha and Mark's marriage. The couple had been married for nearly 20 years, and over time, their relationship had become more of a partnership than a romance. Mark's demanding job kept him away from home for long hours, and when he was present, he was often preoccupied with work. The passion that had once defined their relationship had been replaced by a comfortable but distant routine. It was during one of Mark's many absences that Samantha met Tom Harris, a 42-year-old plumber who had come to fix a persistent leak in their upstairs bathroom. Tom was everything Mark was not: ruggedly handsome, easygoing, and always ready with a joke. He was a single father of two, having gone through a bitter divorce a few years earlier. Despite the difference in their social statuses, there was an instant spark between Samantha and Tom. Their interactions started innocently enough, with casual conversations while Tom worked around the house. Samantha found herself looking forward to his visits, relishing the attention and light-hearted banter that had been missing from her life for so long. As the days passed, their relationship grew closer, the boundaries between client and contractor becoming increasingly blurred. One evening, after finishing the last of his work, Tom stayed a little longer. They shared a bottle of wine, and the conversation drifted from small talk to deeper, more personal topics. Tom spoke about his struggles as a single parent, and Samantha confided in him about her feelings of loneliness and neglect. As the night wore on, the tension between them grew, and what began as a comforting embrace quickly turned into a passionate kiss. That kiss marked the beginning of an affair that would soon spiral out of control. Samantha and Tom became lovers, meeting in secret whenever they could. They would rendezvous in hotels on the outskirts of town, or at Tom's modest apartment when his children were at their mother's house. Each encounter was filled with excitement and danger, a thrilling escape from the monotony of Samantha's daily life. For the first time in years, Samantha felt alive. Tom's attention and affection reignited a passion within her that she thought had long faded. But as their relationship deepened, so did the risks. Despite their best efforts to keep their affair hidden, it was only a matter of time before someone noticed the change in Samantha's behavior. It was her neighbor, Karen, who first suspected something was amiss. She noticed that Samantha's car was often missing from the driveway during the day, and she had seen Tom's truck parked outside the house more frequently than seemed necessary for a simple plumbing job. Karen, a notorious gossip, mentioned her suspicions to another neighbor, and soon, rumors began to spread throughout the community. Unaware of the growing gossip, Samantha and Tom continued their affair, but the thrill of secrecy began to wear off, replaced by a gnawing sense of fear and guilt. Samantha's emotions were in turmoil. She still loved Mark in her own way, and the thought of her children discovering her betrayal was unbearable. Yet, the idea of ending things with Tom seemed equally painful. The turning point came one afternoon when Mark returned home unexpectedly from a business trip. He had sensed a distance in Samantha over the past few months and had decided to take some time off to try and reconnect with his wife. But as he entered the house, he was met with an eerie silence. He called out for Samantha, but there was no response. Mark wandered through the house, his anxiety mounting. When he reached the kitchen, his heart sank. The sight that greeted him was one he would never forget. Samantha was standing by the counter, her her face pale and eyes wide with shock. And next to her, with a look of equal horror, was Tom. The scene was chaotic. Mark's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. He could see the guilt in Samantha's eyes and the panic in Tom's. His world seemed to collapse around him as he realized what had been going on behind his back. In a fit of rage, Mark lunged at Tom, his fists flying as he screamed accusations and demanded answers. The confrontation was violent and brutal. Samantha screamed for them to stop, but her pleas were drowned out by the sounds of the struggle. Tom managed to push Mark away and fled the house, his shirt torn and his face bleeding. Mark, breathing heavily, turned to Samantha, his eyes filled with a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. "Why, Sam? Why did you do this?" His voice cracked, the pain evident in every word. Samantha tried to explain, but the words stuck in her throat. The betrayal was too raw, the emotions too overwhelming. She could only stand there, trembling, as the man she had shared her life with looked at her as if she were a stranger. This was only the beginning of the nightmare that would soon engulf their lives, leading to a tragic and violent conclusion that no one could have foreseen. After the confrontation, Tom disappeared, leaving Samantha and Mark alone in the house, both reeling from what had just occurred. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of rain pounding against the windows. Mark, still in shock, stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. He needed time to think, to process the betrayal that had shattered his world. Samantha stood alone in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she replayed the events in her mind. She felt a surge of guilt and fear, the reality of her actions crashing down on her. She knew she had to end things with Tom, but she was too scared to face him again, especially after what had just happened. As the days passed, the tension between Samantha and Mark was unbearable. They barely spoke, existing in a fragile silence that could break at any moment. Mark refused to address what he had seen, instead throwing himself into work, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. Samantha, tormented by guilt and uncertainty, spent her days alone, dreading what might happen next. Meanwhile, Tom, who had been avoiding Samantha's calls, began to feel the pressure of his actions closing in on him. He knew he had made a mistake getting involved with Samantha, but it was too late to turn back now. The confrontation with Mark had shaken him, and he couldn't get the image of Samantha's terrified face out of his mind. Then, one evening, everything came to a head. It was October 20th, just a week after the incident. Samantha was alone at home, her mind consumed with thoughts of how to fix the mess she had created. She had just put the kids to bed when she heard a knock on the door. Her heart sank as she recognized the silhouette through the frosted glass. It was Tom. She hesitated, but then reluctantly opened the door. Tom stood there, drenched from the rain, his eyes wild with desperation. "We need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "Tom, you shouldn't be here," Samantha whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder, half expecting Mark to appear out of nowhere. "This has to stop. It's over. Over." Tom's face twisted with anger and disbelief. "You're just going to throw everything away after all we've been through?" Samantha took a step back, fear creeping into her voice. "Please, Tom, I can't do this anymore. Mark knows. The kids." Before she could finish, Tom pushed his way inside, slamming the door behind him. His sudden aggression sent a jolt of panic through Samantha. She tried to back away, but he grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful. "You don't get to just end this, Sam. We had something real, and I'm not letting you go back to him like nothing happened." Samantha struggled to pull free, tears welling up in her eyes. "Tom, let go of me, please." But Tom wasn't listening. His face was contorted with rage, his words a torrent of accusations and confusion. "You used me, didn't you? I was just a distraction, while your perfect husband was too busy to notice you. Is that it? Stop it, Tom. You're scaring me." Samantha cried out, her voice trembling. At that moment, Tom's expression changed. The anger faded, replaced by a look of cold, eerie calm. He released her arm, and for a brief moment, Samantha thought he was going to leave. But then, in a swift motion, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, black-handled knife. Samantha's blood ran cold as she stared at the blade, glinting under the dim kitchen light. She stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Tom, what are you doing?" she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "This is your fault, Sam," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You made me do this." Without warning, he lunged at her, the knife aimed at her chest. Samantha screamed and tried to run, but Tom was too quick. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her back as the knife sliced through the air. She felt a sharp pain in her side as the blade cut into her skin, a searing heat spreading through her body. "No!" she cried out, her voice cracking as she struggled against him. But Tom was relentless. His eyes were filled with a dark determination as he pushed her to the floor, his weight pinning her down. Samantha's mind raced as she fought to breathe, the pain in her side growing with every passing second. She tried to push him off, to scream for help, but it was no use. Tom's grip was like iron, his rage unstoppable. With a final, desperate effort, Samantha managed to break free, crawling across the floor towards the kitchen door. But before she could reach it, Tom was on her again, his hand wrapping around her throat as he slammed her head against the cold, hard tiles. "Please, don't," Samantha choked out, her vision blurring as she struggled to stay conscious. But Tom wasn't listening. He raised the knife high above his head, his eyes locked on hers as he brought it down, driving it deep into her chest. Samantha's body convulsed, a strangled gasp escaping her lips as the life drained from her eyes. For a moment, there was silence. Tom stared down at her lifeless body, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The reality of what he had done slowly sank in, the weight of his actions crushing him like a tidal wave. He stumbled backward, the knife falling from his hand as he looked around the blood-soaked kitchen, his mind numb with shock and disbelief. He hadn't meant for this to happen. He just wanted to talk, to make her see that they could still be together. But now it was too late. Tom knew he had to leave. He couldn't stay here, not with Samantha's blood on his hands. He turned and ran, his footsteps echoing through the empty house as he fled into the night, the rain washing away the traces of his presence, but not the guilt that would haunt him forever. The next morning, Mark Williams returned home, his heart heavy with the intention of confronting Samantha and finally addressing the rift in their marriage. As he stepped inside, a cold, eerie silence greeted him. The house felt different, empty, lifeless. A sense of dread washed over him as he called out for Samantha, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. When he reached the kitchen, his blood ran cold. Samantha lay sprawled on the floor, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, a pool of dark, crimson blood spreading beneath her. Mark dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he tried to comprehend the scene before him. He screamed her name, his voice breaking, but it was too late. Samantha was gone. In a daze, Mark dialed 911, his mind struggling to grasp the reality of what had happened. He barely remembered speaking to the operator, his words slurred with shock and horror. Within minutes, the house was swarming with police officers and paramedics, the flashing lights and urgent voices turning the once peaceful home into a chaotic crime scene. Detective Sarah Turner arrived shortly after, taking charge of the investigation. She was a seasoned investigator, known for her keen eye and relentless pursuit of justice. As she surveyed the scene, her gaze fell on Samantha's body, the single stab wound in her chest stark and brutal. The murder weapon, a black-handled kitchen knife, lay discarded beside her. Turner's mind immediately began piecing together the events that could have led to this tragedy. The signs of struggle were evident, broken dishes scattered across the floor, a chair overturned near the counter. Samantha had fought for her life, but whoever had done this was determined to end it. Turner's attention turned to Mark, who was being questioned by an officer in the living room. He looked pale and shattered, his eyes red and hollow. He explained in a trembling voice how he had found Samantha when he came home, how he had no idea who could have done this. His alibi for the night before was verified, and it became clear he wasn't the killer. The investigation quickly turned to Tom Harris. Neighbors had reported seeing his truck outside the Williams house the previous evening, and his sudden disappearance only fueled suspicion. Turner and her team tracked him down to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town, where he was found sitting on the edge of the bed, his face a mask of despair. When Turner entered the room, she saw the blood-stained knife on the bedside table, the same one that had been used to kill Samantha. Tom didn't resist as he was handcuffed and taken into custody. His eyes were glazed, his movements mechanical, as if he were in a trance. He knew there was no escape from what he had done. At the station, Tom broke down during questioning. He recounted the events of that night in a flat, lifeless voice. He spoke of how he had gone to see Samantha, desperate to talk, to convince her to stay with him. But when she told him it was over, something inside him snapped. The rage he had tried so hard to suppress erupted, and before he knew it, he had grabbed the knife. "I didn't mean to kill her," he whispered, his voice cracking with grief and regret. "I loved her. I couldn't let her go." Turner listened, her expression hard and unyielding. She had heard similar stories before. Passion turned deadly, love twisted into obsession. But no amount of remorse could change the fact that Samantha Williams was dead, her life brutally cut short by a man who claimed to love her. Tom Harris was charged with first-degree murder. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. The forensic analysis confirmed that the blood on the knife matched Samantha's, and his fingerprints were found all over the crime scene. The jury took less than an hour to convict him, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mark Williams, left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, moved away from Meadowbrook with his children, the memories of that terrible night haunting him. The house that had once been filled with love and laughter now stood empty, a grim reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. As for Tom, he spent his days in a prison cell, replaying the events over and over in his mind, the weight of his actions a burden he would carry for the rest of his life. What had begun as a forbidden affair had ended in unimaginable violence, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and shattered dreams.